Today's True Crime Tuesday. Good morning, or whatever time it is where you are. It's morning here. Well, morning depending on, it's before noon. I don't know what that means for everybody. Welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome if you're new. I'm Jana. This is Cabernet and True Crime Tuesday, where we try to uncover new information about cold cases. This is actually probably going to be part of a series because I'm dedicating myself to figuring this out, right? And so let's just get right on into it, right? So once again, we'll do the disclaimer. If you hear any noises, I don't live by myself. I have so many other creatures here, and I'm doing laundry right now, so if you hear any noises, just ignore them. I'm going to do my best. That's why I got the mic, if I remember to talk into it. But so that's that. As always, Reddit saw this post first. Once again, just because I like bouncing ideas off other people before I bring it to this platform. And then usually people give me some good feedback and give some information that I didn't originally know. That's why I enjoy doing it. So today, and this rabbit hole that we're going to be going down, is about Henry Lee Lucas. Now, I know there's a documentary about him. Personally, I have not watched it. I do not care. That sounds bad. I do care about the documentary. I've just heard mixed reviews on it. I've heard it's really good, I've heard it's really bad, and therefore I have not watched it. If you think I should watch it, let me know. I will. That's fine. But for right now, I have not watched it yet. But I can tell you without watching the documentary that Henry Lee Lucas is a giant sack of shit. So, do with that information what you will. So I found this cold case, and it's recently a new cold case, and that's because back in the day, Henry Lee Lucas confessed to this murder, and then he didn't actually do it. So that's going to be the theme for this series, is that Henry Lee Lucas is a sack of shit. How can we solve the cases that he lied about committing? How about that? So to go down this rabbit hole, the first person that I found that this kind of pertains to, the first one that I found this absolutely pertains to is Marla Rae Scharp. On June 29th, 1978, 26-year-old Marla Rae Scharp was killed in her Provo, Utah home, and originally her death was attributed to Henry Lee Lucas. Now, some backstory if you don't know who Henry Lee Lucas is. He is a convicted murderer and alleged serial killer. He was from Virginia, had an IQ of 87, read 85 to 87, and didn't have a great childhood. So I just googled what an IQ of 87 technically means. So an IQ score can go from 40 to 140, and average IQ is from 80 to 120. So Henry Lee Lucas had an IQ of 87, so he was still in the average range, but he was definitely below average as far as IQ went. So he wasn't exactly the smartest dude. He also didn't have a great childhood. He killed his mother and was convicted of it in 1960, and then was convicted for other crimes in 1983, which was killing his girlfriend Becky Powell and his elderly landlord Kate Rich. Between that, though, he's claimed to kill up to 600 people. Many cases are like Marla Scharp's, where Henry Lee confessed and the case was closed with no real questions asked. And for a while, he was considered the most prolific serial killer in history. Henry was convicted of murdering 11 people and therefore condemned to death. So that's kind of like the brief history of Henry Lee Lucas. Now, at the beginning of this, I think he started confessing to all these crimes in 1983. At that time period, people were just very quick to close cases because Henry confessed to them. And I don't think anybody really looked into whether it was physically possible or not that he could have committed these crimes. And it wasn't until later that people started looking into this. Once people started looking into his claims, which specifically, and the biggest runner in this was the Dallas Times-Herald newspaper, they said it was outright impossible for Lucas to have committed some of these crimes. And this information was followed up by the Attorney General of Texas, and Lucas's death sentence was commuted to life in prison in 1998. Eventually, Henry Lee Lucas died of congestive heart failure in 2001. People looking into this really opened the floodgates of people looking into this. And I mean, he didn't kill 600 people. There's no way he did. Even if you look at the website for the Confession Killer, the Netflix documentary, there is an actual list of people that Henry Lee Lucas killed. It's down to 222, and even that number's not correct because Marla Scharp's name is still on there, even though in 2019 her case got reopened and it was cold because Henry Lee Lucas did not kill her. They know for a fact he didn't now. But so why did people even believe Henry Lee Lucas? I mean, he wasn't like this huge con man. He wasn't a brainiac, a genius, a serial killing genius. You know, he had a low average IQ, and he was kind of a hillbilly, right? So he did a good job of lying and like parroting back information. People believed him because he was able to provide key details in numerous murder cases, showed police the location of victims, and was able to describe how they died, etc. Added into that he confessed to and was convicted of murdering his mother, really just people believed that he was capable of taking another human life. And because he knew all this information, people believed him. So back to where this was kind of going, right? So you have newspapers and different people looking into Henry Lee Lucas and the sheriff's department that helped, the sheriff's department that got these confessions. If you think about the information for too long, though, you start to see the inconsistencies. And I pulled up the list of crimes that were attributed to Henry Lee Lucas and the counties they were committed in and the time that they were done. And if you look at that, there's no way. Even the 222 that are listed on the Confession Killer website, not even possible. It's just, and it's stuff like, you would see him, and I'm just making this up because I don't know off the top of my head, but you'd see him commit a crime in Cleveland, Ohio, say January 1st at 10 p.m., and then you look, and apparently he's in Texas literally 5 or 6 hours later committing another crime. Like, that's how I don't know how to describe it. That's how it gets at some point, right? Where you're like, there's no way he could have done that and gotten away with it. It's just very inconsistent and very unlikely. So in October 1970 alone, Henry Lee Lucas would have had to have driven over 11,000 miles to be able to carry out the 8 homicides that he claimed to have completed in that time. And I will link in the description below the data set from the documentary, which I do plan on looking into more and working with, but it's just a raw data set. I'm going to zhuzh it up a little bit for my next video. There's a whole big long story about these cases being taken away from Henry Lee Lucas and the lawsuits with the sheriff's department and the battle between the district attorney and all that. I will link that down below as well because I always link all my sources. But so it was a mess. But at the end of the day, they started taking these cases away from Henry Lee Lucas and they're not attributing to him anymore. Like I said before, we know exactly why Henry Lee Lucas did this. He got the fame and attention. But all these cold cases that were closed based on his confessions, and now what? In 2019, it came out that at least 20 of the cases and the victims that were attributed to Henry Lee Lucas were cleared based off DNA evidence alone, meaning they found DNA evidence at the scene that does not and never could match Henry Lee Lucas, or I'm assuming Otis Toole, because I know they were kind of lumped together for a lot of the time. Also in 2019, Marla Rae Scharp's case was opened by the Utah Cold Case Coalition. They looked into it and they had enough evidence that they felt that they could reopen this case. The co-founder of the Utah Cold Case Coalition, Kara Porter, said that they had new evidence that cast significant doubt on the legitimacy of Lucas's confession. And she also suggested that if other states looked into their closed Henry Lee Lucas cases, they would find another possible 80 that needed to be reopened. She said what Henry Lee Lucas did by claiming he had murdered these people was he stopped these investigations. Every case Lucas pleaded guilty to is really a cold case because it has not been solved. And that is completely correct. Marla Scharp's case specifically was closed in 1984 based off of Lucas's confession. In 1985, though, Lucas wrote a letter that recanted his confession of the murder, and at the time the case was not reopened. In 1990, I found an article. It was written that the Utah police were sure they got their guy, Provo Police Captain Markling in the article said, "I'm convinced that Henry killed Marla. If we were to bring Henry here, there's no doubt in my mind that we would get a complaint against him and get a conviction for murder." From that same article, and I will quote, Captain Markling said that he traveled to Texas to interview Lucas and walked away fully convinced that Lucas killed the young woman because Lucas knew details that only the real killer would know. Markling said Friday that there's physical evidence to link Lucas to the murder, but he said, "I don't know if we could convict him without the confession. We've had arguments with the Texas Attorney General's office," said Markling. "They've called us 2 or 3 times and tried to tell us that Henry didn't kill Marla. We're a holdout." That scares me. The fact that Lucas confessed to it, then redacted his confession. Then you have the district attorney saying that, "No, I don't really think it was him." But you've got this police captain who went down to Texas, who you've already got this guy who's being fed a bunch of information. And now, of course he was convincing because he knew information that he wouldn't have known. But that's not the case. He didn't really know that information. But you've got this captain who is so convinced that you have your killer because he confessed to it, that you're not looking at the bigger picture. Now we know for a fact that Henry Lee Lucas did not kill Marla Rae Scharp. And look at what we've missed. Utah Cold Case Coalition believes that over 30 points of information were fed to Lucas to get him to confess to the murder of Scharp. And I have a quote from an article that I found that says, "One of the things that Texas law enforcement used to do was require that a certain amount of information be provided to him before they would let people speak to Henry Lee Lucas. We were able to get some transcripts and some recordings and things that made it clear that nearly all the information that Henry Lee Lucas knew about Marla's murder had in fact been provided to him by law enforcement." In the wake of all these details, the Scharp family must start again trying to solve Marla's murder. And there are some key points I found in another Reddit post. It looks like the person who wrote that Reddit post is actually part of Marla Rae Scharp's family, some distant relation, not distant, some relation, I'm not sure exactly the relationship, but the person who posted it, the Reddit user who posted this, said that they weren't like super close family, but they were family enough that they were at certain events. So, here's what we know about Marla Rae Scharp taken out from the Henry Lee Lucas aspect of this. So completely removing him from the situation, here's what we know about what happened to Marla. Marla Rae Scharp was a BYU student. She was 26 years old at the time of her death on June 29, 1978. Her roommates had stepped out of their apartment for about 30 minutes, and I read somewhere that they had gone to a local laundromat. Provo paramedics responded to a call the next morning at 6:30, 1978. I think it was pretty like 2 a.m., I think the article said, when Marla's body was found. Whoever killed Marla snuck into the apartment via a window while the roommates were out. Marla's killer left a greasy handprint with metal shavings embedded in it, a highly unique Budweiser beer keg tab, a hair that had grown out of a surgical scar tissue and was of Mongoloid origin, and DNA evidence proving the killer was a non-secretor. The evidence was damaged in 1983 due to a flood, and when Henry Lee Lucas confessed to the murder, the rest of the evidence was likely discarded. The writer, like I said, of the original OG Reddit post was a family member to Marla and was there when Marla's remains were exhumed on 4/28/2021. Her vault that her body was in had been damaged, and so no new evidence was gained from that. And an interesting note that I quoted from the OG post was, "Chris Chambers of the Provo City Police has told me personally that the amount of persons of interest went from over 20 when the case was reopened down to only 2. Both have a history of severe mental illnesses. One is confirmed to be deceased and one can't be located, dead or alive. He escaped a mental illness facility in Utah and has fallen off the radar ever since, and they are currently searching for his whereabouts." So this case is actually, I would say, kind of different than the ones I usually do write-ups on, but the whole story is very compelling. The whole aspect of Henry Lee Lucas confessing to all these crimes, and now not only was it a cold case to begin with, but now you've got an even bigger challenge to get over, is the fact that I would assume in a lot of these cases that most of the evidence from these crimes has been gotten rid of. You'd have to imagine with all the crimes that are being committed and all the cold cases that are still growing, there's only so much space for these materials, and I would assume that they just wouldn't keep him around once your case is closed, right? It's really compelling to me personally because I can't imagine how many families were conned out of finding out what actually happened to their family just because Henry Lee Lucas is a lying sack of shit. It's just that it adds like double the pain to the families because they thought they had this case like solved and now they don't anymore. So based off of everything that I know, based off the evidence that I know is true, I have questions. But hopefully, since this case has been reopened and it appears to be continually actively worked on, hopefully we'll have answers. So according to the referenced Reddit article, there was an auto mechanic shop behind the apartments that was never looked into and has since closed. If there was a greasy handprint found with metal shavings, wouldn't that be an obvious red flag? Especially considering that this crime occurred in 1978 and it was, I'm assuming, cold up until Henry Lee Lucas confessed to it in 1984. What had they looked into? What hadn't they looked into? And why was that not investigated more? What's with this Budweiser beer tap? Question number 2. Where would it have come from? Why was it left at the crime scene? And from my understanding, it was found underneath Marla's body. But it's, and I'll put a picture up, but it's a very weird, why would somebody have that on, like, just on their person? I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. Was that ever fingerprinted? Do we know? It's, from what I read, it's a very special beer tap. Not a lot were made. So why couldn't you look into the possible manufacturer of that and see where that was distributed at the time and who would have even had the access to get to it, or like certain bars or establishments where that would have come from. Also from the Reddit post, it said that there were 20 persons of interest when the case was reopened. It seems irresponsible that Provo PD had such a strong stance between 1985 and 1990 when people were questioning the HLL verdict, the Henry Lee Lucas verdict. So you had people actively questioning your decision in 1985 through 1990 when the article was written, and I'm assuming still even after that, because it wasn't reopened until 2019. So you had literally the whole time, you had people questioning this decision, and you had 20 persons of interest when the case reopened. Were those 20 persons of interest there the whole time? Like, were they from your 1978 investigation? Were those, and you just let them live their lives and never even looked into them between now and in 2019 when the case was reopened? That seems really irresponsible. And also, you don't know what those people were up to that whole time. So I found a couple newspaper clippings as well, and some information that I got from that is that Marla had 5 female roommates. 2 of them were staying at the house/apartment. It was a 2-story apartment, but it might have been a house, so it might have been a townhome. I'm not really sure. I'm not really clear on the status of the house that it was in, but I know she was on the 2nd floor bedroom. 2 of them were staying at the house the night that Marla was murdered, and they left around 11 p.m. to go to a local laundromat. So what were the odds? In my head, I'm thinking, what were the odds that they were gone for 30 minutes, and in that specific window of time, Marla is murdered? Also, when they returned, Marla's door was open, and they had assumed she'd gone to bed. I thought that was weird, because who opens their door to go to sleep? If you had 5 other roommates, wouldn't you close your door to go to sleep? I just thought that was a weird detail. I don't know if that's important or if it means anything. That was just something that stuck out weird to me. And also from that is that Marla's landlord had received reports of a barking dog around 2 a.m. the previous evening and had suspected the girl's assailant had visited the area previously. And I had a question that it could be completely wrong. So I know I do like the idea of the body shop employee, but also, was her killer the boyfriend of a roommate or one of her male acquaintances that knew her house's like comings and goings? Because based off of DNA evidence, I'm assuming the killer was a male. They never explicitly say that, but I'm gathering that that was the case because she had been sexually assaulted. So I'm assuming it was a male. But how would they, unless they were staking out the house and they knew, they had to have known she was there by herself. So that I just have, the story of the roommates seems a little weird to me. That they, and I'm thinking about this right now as I'm doing this video, they left at 11 o'clock to go to the laundromat for 30 minutes. That seems weird because 30 minutes is a very random amount of time to spend at a laundromat, in my personal opinion. I think it definitely takes a lot longer to be at a laundromat if you're washing and drying your clothes or just drying your clothes. I think it takes a little bit longer than 30 minutes. But her body wasn't found or reported until, I think, 2, 3 in the morning, not until the next day. The story of the roommate seems weird to me. I don't know if they have anything to do with it. I don't know anything about that, but that seems a little bit suspicious to me, if you ask me. Yeah, so that is something that I'm curious about that aspect of it. Did they look at the roommates, and were the roommates completely cleared? Because I do also know that the roommates all moved out immediately after this happened, and the landlord specifically said it was because they weren't scared, but they just didn't want to be at where the incident happened anymore. And I also thought that was kind of weird, that they weren't moving out because they were scared. I'd be scared, and I'd be fully okay to admit that I'm scared that my roommate got killed in our house, but you're not moving because you're scared. You specifically say that you're not scared, but you're moving out because you don't want to be there where the murder had happened. That seems also just a little bit suspicious. I think we should look at these roommates a little bit more. I think the roommates have some keys that we're not paying attention to. I think their stories are a little bit weird. Some of the things about this case are just so odd, and it's just surprising that they were looked over. I think it's weird that they were so quick to just believe that Henry Lee Lucas did this, and they just didn't look at anything else. So you have this case cold from 1978 to 1983, 1984, when Henry confessed to these crimes, or the specific crime. What were you doing for those couple years? What kind of evidence did you gather? Who did you interview? I'm just, curious. Because all signs do not point to Henry Lee Lucas. Just seems interesting that was never looked into. That's what I've got on this one. I really like the idea of looking into these Henry Lee Lucas cold cases. Well, cases that are now cold because he didn't actually commit them. I'm definitely interested in that. There's a few Otis Toole cases that I found as well. I want to kind of look at these and see where we can find more information and do what we can to help get these families closure, especially because they thought they had it. Cold cases on their own are very sad because you've got these families who will never know what happened to their loved ones, and that's all very upsetting. But at the same time, especially with this Henry Lee Lucas case, that you've got probably close to 100 people who thought they had closure, who thought they had the peace of knowing that their family member got justice, and now they don't anymore. And that is especially upsetting to me personally, but I'm sure the families as well. So whatever we can do to help is what I would like to do. See y'all next week, and we will go from there. Happy True Crime Tuesday, and thank you for watching.